Former CNN host Don Lemon has been under fire after being on camera when activists stormed a Minnesota church. The move by the protesters has been widely rebuked and is being investigated by the Justice Department. Lemon, though, seems to be doubling down in terms of what he thinks went down and why it happened. And here's what he had to say about the church in question.
Now, I think the protesters actually went there to talk to these guys, obviously to disrupt, true, but I think they went there to talk to them. And I think if the pastor, who was what I would have done, Jen, is I would have said, no, we live in a country where we welcome dissent. We welcome
Right.
peaceable, the right to peaceably assemble. We welcome that. None of that happened. I think he started to, when we got there, I think he started just, to preach sort of against the protesters or whatever, which I think is a natural reaction. But I think if you are going to be a representative of the Lord and of God, then perhaps you should conduct yourself as such.
Wow. Okay, Raj, there's a lot there, and there was a lot more conversation than what we could show you there. But it's so interesting to me that he's giving really advice to the church and the pastor and how they should have behaved when they're holding a church service and people burst into their church service. They're exercising their First Amendment rights to worship, and people disrupt that. And instead of rebuking that, he's giving advice to the church that the church should have been more welcoming and should have said, hey, what are your concerns? Let's sit down and talk, when they literally, from what we understand, reportedly came in the middle of a service and disrupted it.
Yeah, well, it should be pointed out that not too long ago, a Catholic mass in Minneapolis was shot up. Kids were killed. You talk about what happened in Manchester at a synagogue. So people storming into places of worship it's going to be met with some fear, with some trepidation. If you burst in, take the political statement out of it. You cannot expect those people to think, you know what, you made a good point. Let's talk. It's like, no, like, of course they're going to be scared. Of course, do these people have guns? What are they doing? And also the idea that this is the First Amendment right, freedom of speech and protest, all this stuff. It's like, this is like a private place. This is I think a private building. If you want to go protest, I guess do it outside, but storming into a place of worship, that's never, you talk about in marriage, like, finding the right time to have communication, the right time to have, let's argue well. Well, this is not arguing well. This is just putting up walls of fear, walls of what are you doing in here? This is not a place, an action that's going to be conducive to dialogue. I mean, how obvious can you be? And then he also said that this was similar to Jesus overturning the money tables in church. I'm like, okay, first off, no. Secondly, Jesus was basically saying, hey, let me read it from Matthew 21. My house will be called a house of prayer. And you're not going to do all this other riffraff, which is the riffraff that you're bringing in to protest things. This is a house of a prayer, a place of worship. The fact is, I guess, and this is a tactic that's being used by people of a certain political persuasion, is if you can be as annoying and as disruptive and as fear-mongering as humanly possible, I guess you'll get clicks and attention. But then to lecture people in the church for not wanting to have a dialogue and saying somehow that's not the Christian response is just absurd. I mean, these people were afraid, and rightfully so, because of the world we're living in. This has almost nothing to do with immigration or ICE. And then also, he was mentioning that, that this is somehow against white supremacy. It's like, listen, dude, like, my family comes from India. You want to talk to a lot of people in the Indian community, they're supporting the idea of enforcing immigration laws. Now, obviously, I'm not here to make political statements, but the idea that this is somehow white supremacy, it's like, come on, dude. Like, these old tropes, these old taglines. Obviously, what happened with Renee Good is tragic, and we can have discussions about that. How far is too far with ICE? That's fine, but to go into a church, storm in, obviously put people on the edge about their own safety, and then lecture them about not being Christ-like, that's ridiculous. On the other hand, I do think that it's incumbent upon us not to use this as a platform for trashing or dunking on someone. I think we should use this opportunity to pray for someone like Don Lemon, like, right, like. I think this is an opportunity for us to say, listen, I don't know what you think the Bible says or how you've interpreted it, but I do pray for your soul, Don. I don't mean that condescendingly. I mean that seriously. I think that we should all be using, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And so I don't think the response to this should be going off in the comment section and just, tearing someone down. I think the response of the church should be, hey, I don't know what's going on in the hearts and minds of these protesters. I don't know why. Obviously, Don Lemon thought this was a wise decision when clearly it was not. But I do think the response of the church should be, listen, hey, Jesus commanded us to love our enemies, to pray for those who persecute us. So I think our first response in this very heated situation would be to pray for the ICE protesters and the ICE enforcement law officers, to pray for those who are scared, to pray for those who are like, well, of course you should deport people that are here illegally. I think the response of the church should be to be those who listen and pray and to, as much, I know it's really hard and it doesn't get clicks and it's not the easy thing to do, but for someone like this who in my opinion is being extraordinarily disrespectful and not even considering that people are have all the right in the world to be scared when people storm into a place of worship, and then to lecture them, listen, hey, I don't know you, I've never met you, but praying for you, brother. And I don't mean that in a belittling way. I mean that seriously. Like I do believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so I pray that in this moment when everyone is, it seems like, wanting to create division and wanting to create fear and wanting to create sparks, that we can be peacemakers. Because blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And in this moment when our country is divided like it always seems to be, let us be the church. Let us be people that say, hey, I might disagree with you, but I love you, brother. And allow this to be a time where our natural reaction isn't to become keyboard warriors, but to be prayer warriors for the soul of our nation. But Billy, I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Bible also talks about there being, time for everything and, season for everything. And I would say that if you're lecturing people, and by the way, Don Lemon has said, I believe, that he didn't know what was going to happen before, and he was just there as a journalist. He was there covering it. So people can debate all of that. I think, though, the way he's talking about it now, there's a season for everything. If you have a grievance with a church or a pastor or over ICE, the season is not in the middle of a service. The season is not in the middle of a mass. The season is not in the middle of whatever is going on, an official church function, to storm in, disrupt it, impede people's First Amendment rights. What you would do if you were really trying to do what he's describing in the clip that we just watched is you would go to that pastor or that church and say, hey, can we sit down for a meeting? Hey, I have a grievance I want to talk to you about. What happened was not that. What happened was an intentional display, and it was terrifying to people, understandably, in that church. We're living in a very troubling and difficult time where you better believe if I'm sitting in a church and people storm in, I'm going to get nervous because you don't know what those people are going to do. It's not normal to do that. The normal thing is to request a meeting and to have that conversation. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And so I think that, this is blown up in their faces pretty bad. And it'll be interesting to see what happens government-wise in terms of charges on this. Again, you don't interrupt a church service, but to your point, we should absolutely be stopping, praying for Don Lemon, for all the people involved in this. The theology here, in my opinion, is way off. The confusion is off the charts, and prayer is the only solution to that and all the other social ills that we're dealing with right now.